Hello, my name is Chad Hill. I'm an archaeologist at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm very pleased to be able to speak with you today about archaeology and drones and site monitoring. Um, and I very much appreciate the invitation to be able to speak to you about this. I'm very sorry not to be able to speak to you either live or in person, so we could talk about this subject more interactively, but I'm glad to be able to talk to you about it at all. Let me start my screen share. Okay. So I'm going to talk, as I said, about drones and site monitoring and looting surveys, the kind of power of this new technology and the accessibility of it and how we can use it for research by giving examples of the ways in which I've been involved in doing this kind of research using these tools. Primarily, I'm going to talk about using them in Jordan as case studies of how we can do this. So I'm an archaeologist, and the sort of one of the primary tools I've been using for the last decade or so is drones for doing archaeological recording of a wide variety of kinds of research questions and tools and field methodologies. I started with this to be able to do a very basic thing that archaeologists have wanted to do since we've been doing archaeology, of course, which is basic documentation of excavations, or being able to get the camera up over sites to be able to take aerial pictures, not to do anything fancy with them, just to be able to take photographs. In 2009, we were running into this problem commonly on one of my projects. Couldn't get good aerial photos, and so I said to my colleagues that I have this background in flying model airplanes, and so we could, instead of standing on ladders or climbing power lines to get overhead photos that are not very good, it doesn't work well, you can't get the camera high enough or at the right angle, that I know how to fly model airplanes, so we could do that ourselves. And so we started doing it on a bunch of the projects that I work on in 2011. So now it's been 11 years since I've been involved in doing this. So I'm a big proponent for the value and power of using drones to take photographs and give you tools for overhead imaging and all the powerful things we can do with that. But drones are, of course, only one of a wide variety of tools we can use to get aerial photographs of landscapes, archaeological sites, cultural heritage, points of interest. And so they're one of this kind of wide range of high and low tech tools that we can use. Historically, this has included things like kites and balloons, the low-tech ladders I was showing in the previous slide. There's a lot of value of using pole aerial photography, getting a camera up above the sites, using a pole, like I'm doing in this image here in the middle from a couple of years ago. And then the much more costly and difficult to arrange tools of using full-scale aircraft to fly overhead to take images down, which of course archaeologists have been doing for as long as there have been aircraft. And then we'll talk about a little bit the value of satellite photography, which has its own trade-offs, but can see much larger areas. So drones fit into this range of potential technologies, and I think are often the best choice for a lot of the kinds of things that we might want to do with aerial photos, because they are, amongst other things, potentially very affordable. The cost for drones is really quite reasonable relative to other potential options, like flying a full-scale aircraft over things that we want to survey, so that the cost for them is relatively low. It can be easy to replace them. There are so many of them being produced now and shipped all over the world that it can be easy, depending on restrictions where you are, to get them. The huge power of the fact that they are easily deployed, that you have a drone with you when you're doing any kind of archaeological work, you have it on you, you can take it out as long as if there's no restrictions, take it out, fly it over the site, take pictures of what's going on, where you are, what things you have found, fly it back, take it down, put it back in your bag, and leave. It's can deploy it over and over again. They're kind of endlessly reusable, and this is a really powerful feature. Relative to things like satellite imagery and full-scale aircraft, they fly at low elevations, so you get very high resolution on the ground, much higher than satellite imagery, and depending on how high you fly, much higher resolution than full-scale aircraft. You can really control the resolution by flying drones at different heights to trade off how large of an area you can cover versus how high the resolution you'll get on the ground is. They're affordable. They're also easily replaced and repaired because they have become such a common global phenomenon. But really, sort of the most important relative to other similar low elevation technologies, similar to relative to pole aerial photography and kites and balloons, they are exceedingly efficient. Increasingly, it is easy to tell the drone, I would like to map this area and mark it out in Google Earth and tell it the height you wanted to fly and how much you need the images to overlap, and it will set its own pre-programmed autonomous flight. And like this image from several years ago is showing, then the drone will fly back and forth across the landscape with no control by the pilot, and record all the images that you need to be able to do high resolution mapping. In 30 minutes of flying, it comes back and lands, and you have the data necessary to do some really powerful mapping. So this is really the really powerful thing for being able to document landscapes, is this really efficient recording that you can just send them out and collect reams of data almost immediately. The primary downside to using drones remains the fact that they can and do crash. So this is my project from when I was a fellow at ACORN in 2016. And we were flying fixed wing drones in the Badia, mapping this Neolithic landscape with the Eastern Badia Archaeological Project. And sadly, in the first of our 2 trips in 2016, the drone crashed. It happens sometimes. And so we were not able to fly any more flights during that trip. With this drone, we had a backup and had to repair it. So this is, it is a less and less common of a problem with drones. They are more and more reliable, but they go up in the air, they're powered by batteries, and they have the potential to break and not work. So this is sort of the major potential problem with drones, but relative to other technologies, that they might not work always reliably as well. And the frequency of crashes like this has come down. Also, as I said, drones are easily repairable. So this particular drone, I had was able to come back to Oman, spend some time rebuilding it, fixing it, had to get a few new parts, and we flew it again later that summer. The technology for drones has changed really dramatically in the last 10 years of using drones. So when I started, there were really no drones you could buy off the shelf that were ready to go, that would just work and do mapping and aerial photography. So we were building, I was building all of the drones that we were using. This is the first quadcopter that I built with parts ordered off the internet, and also adapting existing kinds of cheap radio controlled model airplanes, like this scale model of a Cessna. So this was in 2011 and 2012. And then after a few years, the quality of the drones that you could just go and buy improved significantly and made it both more cost effective and more powerful to be using the most popular kinds of drones that come with cameras built in and do all these autonomous things. And it no longer was necessary to be doing building your own drones and flying them. That the drones that you could just buy work so well out of the box to be able to do all these kinds of things that we want to do for mapping. So those are some of the drones we're using a few years ago, and then some of the latest drones that are good for mapping, both the ones marketed towards basic photography, like the current DJI Mavic 3, and the enterprise level drones, the ones aimed for professionals doing high quality, very accurate mapping. And so the vast majority of people using drones now would be using things like these two quadcopters, but there is still some significant value to using fixed wing drones like I've used in the past in Jordan, because they can fly further and can cover more area more efficiently for the same battery power and the same time aloft compared to multi-rotors. Okay, so this is sort of a background introduction to my background in drones and archaeology and the technology. What can we do with them? So at the most basic level, as I've already said, drones are just a tool to get cameras up into the air to be able to take pictures of landscapes. And there's a lot we can do with that, and lots of kinds of reasons that make sense to do. But at the most basic level, they're let us take pictures of the landscape. And so this is a powerful tool in and of itself, being able to record what landscapes look like, have an aerial view, a perspective that we wouldn't normally have access to. So we can record landscapes and show pictures to people, like I'm showing you now, of what the places that we're working look like. So get these whole sequences of aerial images from different places that I've worked, that let you see what landscapes look like. And increasingly, the drones that you would buy nowadays also can take very high quality video, so you can see more dynamically what the landscapes are like. These are powerful tools just for being able to show people what's going on where you're working and recording and trying to get information. So these are videos from on board multi-rotor drone in 2016 when we were working in Levadia. I'm sitting here in the truck while driving across the landscape, just being able to show what the landscape looks like out here. And then the most obvious thing to be able to do with this for archaeology is document excavation, just being able to take basic overhead shots of what sites look like during archaeological excavation. And this is an exceedingly powerful tool as a sort of basic record of what has happened at archaeological sites. This is, of course, not in any way new technology, right? This is something that we've tried to figure out how to do for archaeology for over a century. We have these really cool examples of Henry Wellcome in 1910 using kites to fly large format film cameras up over excavations and be able to do the same thing. So this is not a new idea. It's just a new technology for doing it that I would think is clearly more functional than trying to fly a film camera up over the landscape. But of course, the most powerful thing that has changed and why drones really have become an invaluable tool for documenting excavations, landscapes, cultural heritage sites is that it's combined with major advances in photogrammetry software, the ability to extract 3D data from series of overlapping images taken with the drone. So by flying these missions and collecting overlapping images, we can get beautiful 3D models, and those are incredibly valuable and powerful things that we can do a lot with for recording archaeology. So from a series of photographs like this that overlap, we need to know, to get good accurate 3D models, we need to know a few points in space. Oops. So in one of these images, for instance, you see all these silver discs, and I've recorded those with, in this case, a total station, but being able to record a few points that we have three-dimensional coordinates for, so that we can accurately scale and locate the 3D model and process it through photogrammetric software to get 3D models like this. This is even now several years old, but you can the technology has only gotten better for recording or for building these 3D models from image sets from drones. So as an example of that, I'll talk a little bit about the project that I was doing when I was a fellow at ACORN in 2016. So this is several years ago now, but as a good example of sort of straightforward mapping of landscapes of cultural heritage sites with drones, the kind of basic premise of what they do for us, right? So this is as part of the Eastern Badia Archaeological Project, working at the two sites here in the Badia, Wadi Al Katafi and Wasad Pools, where the Eastern Badia Project has been running excavations for many years. And this was the primary drone we were using in 2016, the fixed wing drone, which was able to do about 40-minute flights over the landscape with a single camera in the belly of the plane, recording thousands of photographs per flight over the landscape. Now, the powerful, the ambitious goal we had for this project was to use the drones to cover a really surprisingly large area. So this is our proposed survey area is 32 square kilometers around the site of Wadi Katafi. Trying to focus on the Neolithic structures that are distributed around these basaltic mesas inside the survey area here. So these sort of basalt hills covered in Neolithic structures. So the Eastern Badia Project has been excavating here since I think 2009. A whole series of these Neolithic structures, habitation sites that look like this, but there are thousands of these inside our survey area. This is what the drone sees as it's flying over the landscape. So this is our fixed wing drone flying over these mesas. It's taking photos down and recording this little video, sort of wobbly as it's flying over the landscape, to build a 3D model of this mesa. And you can see all of these clusters of stone, of course, are primarily Neolithic structures. And so from each of the drone flights, we get thousands of images like this of that same mesa, where we can see lots of individual archaeological features. And then by feeding the thousands of images from each flight into photogrammetry software, we get these nice 3D models of the individual mesas. To fly around in it and see what the 3D model looks like, but this is only a sort of middle part of doing this kind of work. I am also interested in how, this sort of an aside of how to visualize this data, and one of the cool ways of doing that is through 3D prints, 3D printing. So between 2015 and 2016, after I'd done the survey of this particular mesa, I had a 3D print made of it in color that replicates in very small scale that 3D data that we recorded, that you just saw in the previous animation, and brought it with us so you can see what this 3D print looked like relative, held up against the landscape that it's a recording of. But the primary output, the primary reason for doing this is to take the 3D models and extract spatially accurate two-dimensional ortho photographs, two-dimensional spatially accurate images of the landscape that we can use to measure off of and record and map from. And so that's what this is. This is an ortho photograph of a different one of these mesas at Wadi Katafi. And you can see there in this one, this is where excavations in 2015 and 2016. And there are hundreds of Neolithic structures around this relatively small area. And so from this data, we can, we also have digital elevation model, three-dimensional height elevation that can be used to visualize what the shape of the landscape looks like. And that really also helps pull out each one of these individual structures that's sitting above the surface where the stones are piled up. And then from this combination of digital elevation model and ortho photograph, we can do a lot of mapping, start recording individual features, marking them up in ArcGIS software, and building up a large spatial database of the structures that are distributed across the landscape at the site. One of the cool things that I'm really interested in that we have out at Wadi Katafi are the desert kites. Of course, there was the big press conference in Jordan about these recently, about the very cool new excavations that have been happening about these. But there are a whole bunch of kites distributed across this survey area as well. And these are one of the cool things we were able to document with drones at the site. So we have the animal trap here of this desert kite. And here's a close-up of the ortho photograph showing really good detail of the enclosure at the end of the trap and the arms going off here that gazelle would have been herded into. And the drone imagery is really great for documenting these features, because on the ground they don't look like much. These are what these walls for the guiding arms of these traps look like very little from the ground. They're not big impressive walls. You can walk over it without realizing you've walked over a prehistoric structure. They really become visible in the drone imagery much clearer than in lower resolution satellite imagery. And so we can start mapping in the structures in the ortho photographs that we get from the drones. But also, because we have the 3D data from the drone that we wouldn't get from satellite imagery, we can do cool things like see how these kite traps are using the shape of the landscape as part of the construction of the traps. So lots of these traps are built along the base of the slopes of these mesas, so that the actual trap kind of is over the hill, and it wraps around it so that the animals may not see the trap coming as they're going down these arms, the opening into the trap. Another one just a little bit further to the east, they're using the shape of this kind of bowl, natural bowl between two mesas. And so again, this is the digital elevation model. This is showing the shape of the land around here. And then the enclosure in the trap is using this bowl between two of these mesas, so that gazelles that are running into the trap this way wouldn't have seen that they were coming to the enclosure part of it. And we get this from drone data, because the drone data gives us 3D information that we wouldn't see if we were just looking at this from satellites. And so, having done this large scale survey, and we did this in 2016, and we just finished publication of some of the big results from here, we were able to map 2,000 individual features, primarily Neolithic structures, but also modern features and modern damage to parts of the site, some evidence of looting happening out here. So 2,000 different features that we could map from this 32 square kilometer survey area. So now this is the kind of overview of the final database of all the structures that we recorded from the resulting orthophotographs and digital elevation models. And so this is sort of the whole tidy package of taking thousands of images, process them in photogrammetry, and then in ArcGIS, in a GIS software, marking up all the different features that become visible in the high resolution imagery and three-dimensional data. Here's a closer view of sort of the northern end of Wadi Katafi, showing some of the details. You could see individual kites available here, and all the different walls and lots of different Neolithic structures. Because the drone is flying, can fly at very, very low altitudes to get very high resolution. So each pixel in the orthophotograph can be less than a centimeter, depending on how high you fly. So you get very high resolution imagery. This can also be really good for mapping smaller scale features. So at Wadi Katafi, I was showing that we were mapping large scale features across 32 square kilometers, but we could also use it very effectively for mapping smaller scale features. So at the other site, the Eastern Badia Project works at, this is an example of using drones to get an orthophotograph of a smaller scale area. It's a much smaller area than the previous images I was showing, and using that as a tool in conjunction with mapping petroglyphs at the site of Wissad Pools. So each one of these dots is a different kind of, is a different petroglyph on these basalt boulders around one core part of the site. And so having flown the drone over here and gotten this very high resolution base map, we use this as part of mapping of the existing archaeology, these small scale features on the landscape. So this is much higher resolution local area. And similarly, we have the 3D digital elevation model underlying this data, so we can see how the distribution of the petroglyphs that we've mapped at the site here are placed in relationship to the topography of the region. They're really on the slopes of the site. This is again the site of Wissad Pools, and we have this whole series of petroglyphs that we mapped in 2015 of the placement of these petroglyphs depicting desert kites and animals around this natural pool area at the site. So I've talked about how drones could be used as sort of straightforward mapping tools for building up a picture of what the landscape looks like at one particular point in time, and that can be used to extract mapping data and 3D shape data of landscapes and archaeological sites. The next very powerful thing we can do, because I said, one of the values of drones is the repeatability of being able to fly them whenever you want, is that by flying them the same area through time, they give us change over time data that is incredibly valuable for monitoring sites for change, for damage, for looting. And so this is one of the really powerful things that drones give us that might be harder to do with full-scale aircraft or satellite imagery if we need to, if you have to pay for tasking or new imagery each time you do it. If you have access to drones and access to sites, drones let us build time series image sets to track changes to the landscape in a powerful way that would be difficult to replicate, because they're so efficient and because they're so easy if you have access to put them back in the air sequentially. So this is the next thing I'll talk about is the value of, or how we can use change over time data to do site monitoring. So this is a project I've been working on also for many years, documenting looting at a few sites in Jordan as part of the larger Follow the Pots project. And this project is in conjunction with Morag Herschel at DePaul University, who I think will also be speaking to in a different lecture. Hopefully this won't overlap too much with what she will talk about. So the Follow the Pots project is focused on these 5 sites in the Jordan Valley. With our particular part of my particular part of the project with Morag focusing primarily on just one of these, the site of Feifa, the one of these early Bronze Age cemeteries located along the valley here. And all 5 of these sites have had intensive looting at various points in the past. We can get evidence for this. We can see something about the scale and pace of looting at the site that we're primarily focused on for this part of the project at Feifa from historical aerial images. So there's the great Apame project that was originally led by David Kennedy, that's been flying and taking aerial photographs, of course, of archaeological sites all over Jordan for many, many years. And so from there, aerial images of sites through time, we can see how the site has changed in broad scale since the 90s. So we have this aerial view of Feifa from 1998, looking from west to east from a helicopter. And you can see that there are a few places where there's dense quantities of looting pits on the site in these 2 circled areas. But by 2011, so by a little more than a decade later, more or less the same view. This is still looking west to east. There's this later Iron Age enclosure on the western edge of the site, and this is the same enclosure here and here that's circled. Now the looting pits in the intervening decade are throughout the site. There's huge expansion and looting happened between these 2 aerial photographs. So Morag and I, we wanted to use drones to start monitoring these sites to see, to be able to record something about the scale and pace of looting happening when we started the project and into the present, and see if we could use drones to be able to get time sequence data that would tell us something very, very accurate about how and whether and how looting is continuing at the site. So we started this intensive drone survey project in 2012, 2013, and combined doing drone survey on the site with intensive foot survey, looking at the material culture on the surface and evidence of looting on the surface in person. So this is, of course, early Bronze Age cemetery. There are thousands of burials at the site of Feifa. They all have relatively similar grave goods. If you find one of these burials, you're very likely to find a relatively similar series of artifacts. This can include beads and these shell bracelets and loom weights. But the important thing, of course, is these often complete intact vessels. These are what are getting sold. These are the goal of the looting at the site is to get these complete vessels and sell them onto the antiquities market. So Morag and I undertook a project to fly drones here every year for a series of years and see if we could do some nice change over time mapping of the site and document looting through this very high resolution 3D data that we can generate with the drones. So we've used a variety of drones at the site as drone technology has changed. We started with a very, very similar fixed wing to what we're using out in the Eastern Badia. And got similar kinds of videos. Again, sorry, this is kind of jerky because this is the way the fixed wing flies, not as stable as a quadcopter, but you can see the nice aerial perspective on the landscape and the significant density of looting pits at the site here. This must be in 2014. And then once the quadcopter technology had gotten better, we switched to, because the site is also relatively small relative to like the Eastern Body project I was talking about, we switched to primarily using quadcopters on the site because they can, with good autonomous navigation, they can start to cover the site in relatively efficient manner. And it's easier to fly quadcopters where it's possible because they take off vertically. They don't need a lot of space to take off and land, and they can hover and stop. And so it's just easier to take them off when you don't need to kind of cover larger areas with fixed wing drones. And the video from quadcopters is much better. So this is a slightly sped up video that's very smooth and stable, showing a larger perspective of the landscape in a clear aerial view of the density of looting pits across the site. So this is what it looks like as the drone flies overhead. You can just see us standing there, I think. And so, of course, though the goal isn't to take videos, it's to record these series of overlapping images. So the images look like this. We'll get thousands of these per trip to the site, if we can get to the site. And the resulting ortho photograph, this high resolution, spatially accurate map of the site, gives us a product like this. So this is what the site looked like in 2016. And then in a variety of ways, we can interrogate this data and find where new pits are occurring from one year to the next. So I think this is the center of the site, the place where we usually put our equipment down to get started. So this is 2015. This is our box with all the drone stuff and our cooler where we set up, and a picture of the kind of takeoff area where there's no holes here. And then the following year, when we came back in 2016, this is looking at the same area, top and bottom, 2015 and 2016. There are several new pits that have appeared in the intervening year between when these two pictures were taken. But we can also not just visually inspect the image and say, oh, I see a new pit here and here, but we can compare the 3D shape of the, we can highlight pits by processing the 3D data in a few different ways. So this is what this is doing here. It's showing where in the local area, the ground dips down or comes up higher than the area around it. And this really like highlights individual pits. This is the eastern edge of the looting. And you can see each of these blue areas is a negative space on the landscape, and each of the red areas is a positive hill on the shape. And so these are looting pits, and then the dirt heap next to the looting pit that was dug out. So this really helps pick out individual pits, so you can count them and map them. You can also see that on the edge of the site, the pits are less blue because they're less deep, because this is the edge of the site. And you can really see that a bunch of looter pits along the edge of the site have been abandoned without going all the way down because they didn't find a burial here. So with this kind of processing, we can see where pits aren't as deep, and potentially how this is helping identify sort of the limits of the site. And so over the course of, we did this, we were able to do this in 4 years in a row, 4 years in a row. And so get 3 series of changes, 2013, 2014, 2014, 2015, 2015 to 2016. We identified several thousand looters pits mapped here. We can also, in addition to being able to visualize these by sort of processing 3D data, we can really highlight where the landscape has changed by taking one 3D model and subtracting it from the next year's 3D model. And where there's a big difference, this is where there's either a new pit because a negative change has happened from one year to the next, or there's a new hill because the dirt has been thrown out of the pit. So that's what we're seeing here is the digital elevation models being subtracted from each other, and seeing a new negative change in the landscape that's black here because there's a new pit and a new positive change because that's the dirt that's been thrown out. We have the same thing here where you have a negative pit dug down, which is this one colored red, and then a positive hill, small pile, because that's the dirt that's been thrown out of it. And similarly, we can see in the 2013 image, there's no hole here. Then in 2014, there's a hole here. And we can see what that shape looks like in the 3D model. And so this let us be able to see changes from one year to the next and pick out when there's been new pits showing up, or where on the site new pits are still occurring from one year to the next, and how many of them there are, and whether they're clustering around the site. And that's what we've summarized here with new pits that appeared in 2014, from 2013 to 2014, from 2014 to 2015, and from 2015 to 2016. And this is different than if we were doing this with satellite imagery, because it's giving us a very, very high resolution. We can see the individual pits at a resolution that you wouldn't really be able to do with satellite imagery only. And because we have this 3D data that can really highlight this. And the take-home message, the conclusion of the project, of course, is that looting is continuing here at the site, and there is both. There are burials that are still worth. There's preserved burials still in the site, despite the fact that there's so many looting holes across the site. There are many more intact burials that are still on the site, that are still potentially can be looted and are worthy of potential protection going forward, and investigation. So in a summary of what this has found is that we identified 34 new graves in the first 2-year period, the first year period, 3 new graves the second year period, and then 24 new looted graves in the third group that we did. And then it was hard to get drones back into use as foreign researchers after 2016 for a couple of years. Then we've been hopeful that we could come back and do this again, and then haven't, of course, been able to come because of COVID. We'd still like to be able to return here and do more drone surveys at the site and potentially expand it to other sites. So we can keep this kind of monitoring going through time, since we have these good baseline data about how it was changing over a series of years. We were also able, with this kind of survey, because we have this high resolution change over time data, to see other kinds of damage that were happening at the site that we weren't even sort of intentionally tracking. That's down here along the edge. We found this data when we visited the site in 2016. We noticed these kind of fresh scars on the side of the site. And then when we looked at the data from 2014 to 2015 and 2015 to 2016, we could see that there was in fact new damage along the edge here compared to the earlier version here. Someone has been digging into the side of the site, and that has resulted in additional burials being kind of eroded from the side of the site. And we can see that in the 3D data, comparing one digital elevation model to the next and subtracting them and seeing where there's a big negative change. And so this is the same view, and red here is a negative change where soil has been removed a little bit here, a lot over here in the first 2014, 2015, and then a lot of material removed along this edge between 2015 and 2016. And so we could see a whole other kind of data damage happening at the site because we have this high quality mapping information. We've also done this at, we would like to be able to keep doing this at the other sites in the region, like at Babadra to the north. But we, as I said, haven't been able to do more drone work here that we would very much like to, and are hoping that it will be possible again. In the meantime, especially during COVID, we've been trying to continue this kind of monitoring with satellite data, and this is also a common thing that is an alternate option for monitoring sites. The big trade-off is in both repeatability, how easy it is to get time series data when you want it. Either you have to pay a lot of money to get new imagery, or rely on the existence of imagery that you can find in a variety of ways online that you don't have necessarily control over, and maybe isn't, I mean, it's for sure not as high resolution as drone imagery, but maybe even lower. The best you can get from commercial satellite imagery is 30 centimeters per pixel, so that each pixel in the image is 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, and that compare that to the drone imagery that we have at FEFA, which is on the order of a centimeter per pixel, so 30 times higher resolution. So we've been doing that. We're continuing the project in the present with satellite imagery from intervening years since we were last able to do drone work here. And so we have been able to identify new areas of looting way off to the east. So we visited this area off the edge of the site, and we knew in 2016 that there were a few looters pits over here. And in the most recent satellite imagery that we've analyzed from 2019, the kind of looting has expanded around this area. And so we're hoping that we can get back there and also collect higher resolution, comparable data to really count the looting pits there, and not just, it's sort of hard to pick out individual pits from this image because it's lower resolution. And so we're doing this now for 3 of the sites, collecting satellite time series data to be able to track the pace of looting over these multiple sites at wider scales. And so this is the big thing that satellite information lets you do, is cover larger areas and be able to access more sites. So when we're monitoring just FEFA, the best option is using drone data to do that, where we can go on the ground and collect high resolution data over a relatively constrained area. If we want to do it on multiple sites, and this is true of lots of kinds of looting monitoring, satellite data gives you much broader access to monitoring multiple sites across a wider area. Also, potentially you can get greater time depth if you are able to go back in time before when you're trying to start a new project. So we're adding in, when we're monitoring these sites now, in data that we've gotten for the last couple of years since we were able to do drones, we're also adding satellite imagery from before we started using the drones to kind of bracket the information that we were already gathering in high resolution. So we're adding things like the declassified Corona satellite imagery from the 60s and hexagon satellite imagery from the 70s that are lower resolution, but still give a very early view of what the sites looked like before heavy looting damage, and then are using the very high resolution satellite imagery, so the 30 centimeter imagery from the last couple of years, that can really pick up how the stuff is changing recently. It is, of course, not also possible to use very low cost tools for catching time series information of landscape change like this. So there's a great paper that Dan Contreras and Neil Brody published many years ago now, using free data on Google Earth to map change through time, because you get this time scale slider on Google Earth, so you can scroll backwards in time of free imagery. And although the resolution is much lower generally from the free imagery, you can do things like low resolution monitoring of where big damage areas are happening. So they also were monitoring Baba Dra using Google Earth imagery, but rather than trying to pick out individual pits, which gets very hard at these lower resolutions, they were kind of mapping new damaged areas from one year to the next. But this is a highly accessible tool for kind of broad scale and multiple site monitoring. Okay, this was a lot about kind of how we can do time series mapping. I'm going to talk about one more technology that's really good for kind of cultural site recording. That's what I've been working on a lot over the last several years, and that's drone LiDAR as an alternate option, but a very particular choice for why this you might want to be, or limits to how you can be recording cultural site data. So LiDAR, of course, is not a new technology. It's been used for many years now, but primarily on full-scale aircraft, on airplanes and helicopters. And they, of course, work by having a spinning series of lasers. They're shooting out hundreds to thousands of laser pulses per second and getting the bounce back of the beam to the sensor after it hits the ground. And if you have enough of these shots flying over a vegetated landscape, so trees and bushes, and shrubs, some of the laser shots will make it all the way to the ground despite the heavy presence of heavy vegetation. And so this lets you see through vegetation, in a manner of speaking. And so it's a really powerful tool for mapping archaeology and architecture and cultural materials that are not visible to satellite imagery and to drone photography. It's not always the case in Jordan, but it is still a powerful potential tool, and it sort of fills out the kind of things we can do with drones. So these drone LiDAR has become really accessible in the last few years. They're still exceedingly expensive relative to the cost of a drone. A drone can cost as little as a few $100s. The LiDAR sensors still cost tens of thousands of dollars. They're not affordable, but they are. You can get them, and they make them at a size that's specifically for drones. Drones are LiDAR is recording thousands of points per second, and what you get as a result is a point cloud, not a 3D model, but a series of millions of individual points, giving you information about vegetation and landscapes and archaeology. This is sort of a three-dimensional view of what a point cloud, a typical point cloud, looks like. And this is the sort of visualization of the ideal thing that LiDAR is doing. As the drone flies overhead, it's shooting all these laser points down. Most of them are hitting, for instance, the trees in this image, but some of them make it through the trees and hit the ground underneath and record the shape of the ground below the trees. And so then we can do some cool processing to remove the trees and just leave the ground. Oops. At the bottom here, we see a bunch of trees. They've been color-coded green. The ground has been color-coded brown. Buildings are color-coded as orange. And we can see this man-made channel underneath this tree that if I was just taking a photograph straight down, you would not be able to see. So we can record these kinds of human-made features with this technology that we wouldn't be able to do any other way. There are a lot of limits to doing this with drones. With the sensors that are made to be flown on a drone have a bunch of limitations. They have a limited range, so you can only fly them up to something like 75 meters, but the higher you fly them, the smaller their field of view is, so you have to fly them low enough to see a wide angle on the ground. There's a whole bunch of trade-offs of being able to fly them, and they are heavy, they don't fly that long, so you get limited ability to cover wide areas with the state of the technology right now, especially relative to full-scale aircraft. But the plus side is that it has the same kind of benefit of other drone technologies, which is that you can go out and do it yourself, repeat it, and apply it to places where you might not otherwise be able to record data. Skip this for a second. So as an example of what this looks like, we have done some drone LiDAR in Hawaii in the US, on the beautiful Big Island here. A couple of sites on the western end of western coast of the Big Island in Hawaii. And this is a site that is a good example. We had heavy tree cover over this historic site on the island, where you can't see anything from drone imagery from above. And so the surface of the ground in 3D looks like this on the top here, where you can see all the individual trees covering most of the landscape. But then when we do the LiDAR and we strip off the vegetation, you can see a whole bunch of anthropogenic human-made features, these walls that run all underneath these trees, and this pathway becomes instantly visible as a bare earth model. Similarly, just to the west of the same site, we have this dense tree canopy cover. In 3D, the trees look like this, but when we strip all of these trees off, take off the points that include vegetation, we can see this whole sort of town complex underneath the trees, these rectilinear features and housing, foundations, all these features become visible on the landscape that from satellite imagery, from drone imagery, you would not be able to see. So where there is vegetation limiting what you can see, this becomes the only choice for being able to record archaeological data. But there's only some places, I think, in Jordan where this would be valuable. Often, like especially where I've worked in the Badia, you can see the archaeology, and if you can see the archaeology, you can map it with photographs, which are much cheaper and much easier to go and do. The processing is easier than LiDAR. But I wanted to give that as an example of other kinds of drone tools that can be really powerful for mapping features for cultural heritage monitoring and protection that you wouldn't be able to map with any other tools. So I've been talking for long enough for sure. Thank you for bearing with me. As a sort of summary, drones are this incredibly valuable technology. I didn't really touch that much on when and where they can and can't be used, but this is an ongoing issue all over the world. But when it's possible to use them, they provide low cost, easy to use, rapid recording of time series data for the monitoring of archaeological sites at up to sort of the kilometer scale region. The example I gave of our work in the Eastern Badia, this is 32 square kilometers. This is a really big area for drones. That's sort of pushing what you could do. That's over a long period of time, lots of flights. That sort of up to that size is doable with drones. It works great for individual sites and landscapes around individual sites, like at Fayetteville, where you can cover in like one day of flying, you'd be able to cover the site and the landscape around it. As an alternative, LiDAR can provide recording under vegetation at increased cost and increased processing, and but is the only option in some cases. And then as the other trade-off, you can use satellite imagery to do the same kinds of monitoring of sites and landscape change, but the trade-off is to cover larger regions, and with deeper time depth, you get lower resolution, potentially increased cost, and less ability to control the timing of recording and the accessibility of recording. So I hope this was interesting. Thank you for listening to me. And I hope it is valuable. I haven't been in Jordan in a few years now, and I'm really looking forward to coming back, and I hope to see maybe some of you in the relatively near future. Thank you very much.